part of SSA
Yeah.
at Oregon State,
Mhm.
and what's your background? How did you get into SSA?
So my religious background or my
both.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I grew up
More of your religious background and how that related to you getting into SSA.
I grew up in a very Hindu family. I grew up in India. I was born there. I was raised there for like a lot of my life, and I grew up in two major places. One was Jaipur, which is the city my dad is from, and that city is primarily Hindu. It's about 80% Hindu.
Okay.
And then I grew up in Bareilly, which is the city my mom is from, and that city is about, I'd say, 50% Hindu, 40% Muslim, and 10% other.
Okay.
So it was more of a village, that one, but rather than a city. But so that's the place I come. I've always been an atheist as long as I can personally remember.
Yeah. How about your parents?
My parents are very Hindu.
Okay.
I've personally always been a atheist, and I can remember the exact moment I realized I was an atheist, and that was when I was 5 years old, and I was just sitting around in like the village, and I was like in my living room, and I was playing with a Batman action figure, and my grandfather comes in and he says, "Hey, we're gonna show you a bit. We're gonna go to the temple," and then I said no, because even at 5 years old, I was like, okay, Batman, God, Batman's probably a bit more important, and then I got yelled at, and then that then convinced me to become religious for some reason.
Yeah.
I officially declared myself as an atheist when I was about 10, and because I found the word for it. I didn't know what the word was.
Yeah, okay.
So I realized, atheist means that you don't believe in God. Well, I guess that's what I am. I actually learned the Hindi word for it first, Gnostic, rather than atheist. And then I found the word atheist through that.
Yeah.
I joined SSA when I came to Oregon State when I was 18. It was the same guy, Matt Enlow.
Came from India.
I actually moved to Oregon. I moved to Portland when I was 12.
Okay.
So I had been in Oregon for 6 years before that. And then when I went to Oregon State, I found the same guy, Matt Enlow. He told me about the club, and I started going to the meetings. And then I rose to the rank of president after about 2 years of that.
Yeah. So you're El Presidente.
I'm El Presidente. And that was pretty fun for me because I got to meet a lot of people who I'm fairly like-minded in the sense that we all share a view that we don't believe in God, and that's something I didn't have when I was growing up. I didn't have that community. I was in a way very lonely. People didn't actively stigmatize me in India. That's not as much of a thing because there is a very rich tradition of atheism in India. So we've had atheist prime ministers before America's had atheist presidents. So people didn't stigmatize me, but I was very lonely because people also didn't get it. Part of the reason why there isn't a stigma in India around atheism is because atheists are so rare that people just can't hate them. People are just sort of like, oh, that's cool, didn't know about that. So it was nice to have a community of people I can talk to. Although we do have Christian members in the club, it was good to have a community of atheists there.
And so you came to the States. You clearly at times had some people you knew who believed in God.
Oh, clearly.
And obviously there's different concepts of God. You would have been very sensitive to this growing up
in a very multicultural, multi-faith.
Multi-faith region. And actually some ideas within Hindu are monotheistic and some are less
polytheistic, some are full-on atheistic.
So you get even within Hinduism, I believe it's, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but from what I've read, it seems pretty clear.
A lot of Hindus aren't experts either.
A lot of Christians aren't experts either about their faith, as I'm sure. So at what point, or have you ever just thought, I'm going to I'm going to wrestle more with this question of God and really delve into the why people believe in God, or is that really just not been?
I've done that, I've had to. I read the Bible, I believe, the first time when I was 11. I read the Quran a year before that. So I've been I have engaged with these ideas I've tried to believe in it, but...
You were a very smart 10 and 11-year-old if you were reading these books to try and figure out what you believe.
It was. It's always been something that's interested me, and that's partially because I did grow up atheist in such a religious area.
Right.
So when you see people going out, and it's the Muslims are going on Fridays, and then they're going to pray, and then the Christians are getting up early on Sunday, and then they're going to pray, and then the Hindus have idols everywhere, and then they pray to them, and I just never could believe in any of that. So I try to engage myself in those things. Another thing that I do is that I'm a writer. I love writing. I write stories.
Good for you.
All that stuff. And religion to me, like I do see the stories in them. The stories are there, they're common, they're constant, like they're in both the religions that exist today and in like religions from the past.
Yeah.
And those are things that I do see how people find inspiration in them. So even when I was a kid, I would be reading the Bible and the Quran, and I'd be like, cool, let's look at the stories here and see how I can adapt these into my own narratives.
So you would be okay if the Bible then was read as a book in schools?
Depends on the context you're teaching it in, right? Like I would be
not by like a pastor, I mean.
Yeah, like there were in my high school, the high school I went to here in no, not here, but in Oregon.
In Oregon,
they had a class which was taught by an atheist teacher, and the class was Bible as literature. And I didn't take it. I knew a lot of people who did take it. I was taking some other class at the time, but it apparently was a very good class because it wasn't. They read the Bible, but they didn't read it being like, "This is true." And I think that's where the problem would lie.
What if a Christian had taught the class?
Let me finish that very quick.
Sorry,
it's no problem. So they were reading the Bible, and they said this. They didn't say this is true. They tried to analyze the Bible from a historical perspective. They put in the historical context of what was happening at the time. Yeah. And then they also put it in the context of how it had been written, and to make it very clear that what we were reading was a translation. It's not what was actually written, like by Luke or Matthew or all those other apostles. And I thought that was really useful. If a Christian had taught that class, I believe the Christian could have spoken about how they personally related to the material, but I think it would have been a problem and also very alienating for a lot of the other people in the class if they used it as an opportunity to be evangelical about it or evangelize.
I think I'm 100% in agreement with you. And I also think, I probably would agree with you, I bet you think this, that it would be very difficult for a Christian to resist trying to say this is all like you have to believe this.
Then I put you in the perspective of this. Like if you walked into a class which was about teaching the Quran, and then the Muslim professor took the opportunity to use that to be like, and this is why this is all correct, and why this is true, and if you don't believe in it, then you're going to go to hell or whatever. Although you wouldn't go to hell because you're Christian. You would find that to be quite alienating, and I believe it wouldn't help you engage with the material.
So here's kind of my you weren't asking too much my take on it, but I actually have an imam come and teach the Quran when at the university I'm at. Yeah. Because I feel like I do teach the Quran myself, but I also feel it's important for them to hear an imam talk about it.
You need to have it in the context.
So I try to give a variety of voices, and I try when I teach the Bible to be very much like, if you're going to approach the Bible, even if you're a Christian, you have to start by approaching it like you would Herodotus or another ancient historian or poet or whatever. You have to start by just trying to understand context, language, meaning, why was this important to the author? And it seems to me like you can do that, and then that's where you end then. Yeah. You why has this book been valuable to people? You can talk about that. You just have to be very careful to not, like you said, alienate the students in the room. And I would think you could have Christian or different people teach it.
I also think that if you're having a class like a general religious studies class where you look at religious books, you do in your class, you shouldn't just do one book. You should look at all of them and also try to teach them in about the same way.
Yes,
obviously,
I totally
for
agree
the Bible,
with this.
you'd have a little bit more of a personal connection. You can talk about that, but you should try to make sure all the views are shown in a non-biased way.
I totally agree with this. I'll tell you, I had when I became a Christian, I was in university, and I was a classical language major. And so I read philosophers, and I read Homer and things. And then once in a while, we would read the Bible. And I did some Hebrew where we read some Bible and then a bunch of other stuff. And my professors were not religious. Yeah. And occasionally, I felt alienated because the professors, I could tell, were trying to beat down the Bible in ways I didn't actually think was fair. Some things I understood, like why they would disagree with things. And other things I found they were kind of trying to make it difficult. They were trying to mock my beliefs. Okay. And I say that not because I'm trying to be hard on them, but to say anybody who takes something that is highly valuable by some of the community and not others has to deal very carefully with this. So back to your own story. When you look at these, like you obviously already were an atheist, so that you just saw some of the arguments, you read some things about why people believe, and it was unconvincing. I think that's probably the fair way to say it. Obviously, I find that it is convincing, and I wouldn't, like a lot of people that I'm interviewing say, well, there's no evidence for God. And I say, well, obviously I think there is evidence for God, like really, really good evidence for God. So is that right? You would sort of agree with me that you accept that I have evidence, but it's not convincing to you, but it's for some reason convincing to me? Is that
I believe that you believe it, basically. It's like what it comes down to.
What I mean is, do you think there's any integrity in my thinking?
I think, like, obviously, if this is something that you've devoted your life to and this is something you care about, it's obviously something that's important to you. And that there is integrity in that thinking.
I mean intellectually.
Yeah, like, obviously, there would be intellectual... I don't think that you would believe in something if you didn't intellectually think there was something there. It's not something I understand. Most of my family is deeply religious. A lot of my friends are very religious, like, both here in the U.S. and in India. I also am very much in favor of, like, trying to talk to people you disagree with. I go out to rural Oregon, like, when I can, just to like talk to people and see what they have to say. It like helps me like to understand people, and I like, as a writer, I like to hear people's stories.
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah, you must. Yeah, exactly. You're sensitive to the story.
Yeah,
the power of stories.
Yeah. Like your own narrative, you went to college in Minnesota, and then you wound up teaching the Bible in Alabama. Like, that's a story. It's something.
No. I teach Latin and Greek.
Oh, I
and
see.
History
I thought you
philosophy.
said that you taught the Bible.
No, I mean I teach the Bible informally. I have no. I'm not a formal Bible person. Okay. Like a pastor or anything like that. I'm an academic.
I see.
So, are one of the arguments for theism a little stronger to you than other ones?
I'd say the strongest argument for theism that I've come across would probably just be the creation of the universe itself. It's something that we don't fully understand exactly what happened there. Like, we have a pretty good idea now, I believe, because we know about the Big Bang. We can like prove that. We can we've listened to those radio waves. We know
we can go back to the singularity anyway.
Yeah, we saw like 14 billion years ago. Like, we have it almost down to like the millionth year. Like,
it's amazing. 10 to the negative 36, I think, is what the time frame is.
So. But I still agree that we can't see what happened there, exactly, what triggered it. And for me personally, it's something that I don't need to know. Like, I'm fairly confident at some point we'll figure it out. For like about 10,000, human culture has been around for about 10,000 years. Yeah. We've only recently figured it out in like the last 40.
Yeah, it's very recent, for sure.
I'm fairly confident at some point we'll get it, and I don't really need to concern myself about why. Okay. But I understand that's not a very convincing case if I'm trying to make it to somebody else. Like, they'd just be like, well, how can you prove that if you're just waiting? And I'm like, no, that's what I'm doing. I'm just waiting.
Yeah, you can't prove it.
Yeah.
It's a hope you have.
Yeah.
That's based on the progress of science and progress of humanity.
Yeah, and I'm fairly confident in that hope, but it's like in the same way you're fairly confident in your faith. Yeah. Like, another thing, though,
Can I respond to that one and ask you a question about it?
Yeah, sure. Can I just finish one sentence real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. I thought you were going to go to a second reason.
No. I'm actually continuing on with that. I'm going to talk about my family. So that's something that my family would say. They would be like, oh, well, maybe it was God that started that. And for a while, I'd be like, okay, so do you know what deism is?
Deism?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So for a while, when I was about, shortly after I read those books, I experimented with deism for a little while. I was just sort of like, maybe a God created the universe and then he just left it. And that was something I could believe fairly well. Yeah. Yeah, continue.
Okay, so that's exactly what I was going to say, is obviously the choice, like the way I would view this question is that it's more simple than sort of having to wait for 10,000 years, another 10,000 years. Yeah. In that because science can only take us back to a singularity, right? Because at that point, a singularity just means the math no longer works. Yeah. And this is as close as you can get to the concept of a beginning. Now, maybe you can get back to 10 to the negative second, negative 2 or something. Who knows how far back they'll actually get. But obviously, when you hit t equals 0, you don't have a universe anymore, or at least you don't really have any, it's as close as you can get to the idea that there was nothing. If someone through most of history, a lot of thinkers thought the universe was eternal, right? Even Thomas Aquinas, his proof for God does not assume a beginning. Yeah. So he didn't think we could prove there's a beginning.
The static state universe.
Yeah. So the idea that there's a beginning is actually, in science, is really, really new, really fresh. And the evidence does really look like there is a beginning. Meaning, if you thought there was a beginning to the universe, the evidence we have is perfectly consistent with that. Yeah. So we're in that sort of like it's very credible to think there's a universe now and there previously wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think of that scenario as being not complex, not difficult. We don't have to wait to figure that out.
Yeah.
We logically have the answer for this, and we can rule out other answers. So I think of it as logically inconceivable that the universe sort of created itself.
Okay.
I don't see how that works at all logically, because for the obvious reason. And therefore, I conclude it seems like really strong evidence to me that there's being independent from the universe, your deistic sort of concept, and that's a really good explanation, and there's no reason to doubt it. What would be the problem with my thinking?
I think the problem with that thinking, this is something I haven't actually refuted in a while. So and the reason that I'll tell you why I personally stopped believing in that idea.
Sure.
The reason I personally stopped believing in that idea is I was a deist from about 12 to 14, maybe 12 to 15, and then I just went back to atheism. I was just like, okay, that makes more sense to me ultimately. Yeah. And part of the reason why that made more sense to me ultimately is because as I started doing a lot of reading about the Big Bang and about the theories that a lot of scientists had about this, I just came to the conclusion that we don't know what came before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a religious force that, not a religious force, independent, omniscient, I'd say, not omniscient, omnipotent, that's the right word, force that did it. And my personal reasoning for deciding that it didn't make sense is because a lot of people point out that before t equals 0, the mathematical rules we have now don't really apply, because that was a different universe. And